Okay, we're live.
Okay, everyone, if you're listening right now, we are streaming live on the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission Facebook page as part of our virtual outdoor expo. And we will begin with our session number 2, Pennsylvania State Fish Hatcheries, in approximately 1 minute. Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this session as part of our 2021 Virtual Outdoor Expo, hosted by the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission this week. We are presenting our virtual sessions on Facebook, and remember, we'll also be archiving our sessions on the PFBC YouTube page and our website, fishandboat.com. So please check back for those in the coming days if you're unable to join us live for our streaming sessions here on Facebook. Remember, a schedule of our remaining events for this week is available on the Facebook page. And while we're streaming, your comments are welcome, relevant to our conversation, which today is Pennsylvania's state fish hatcheries. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mike Parker, Communications Director for the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission. Our producer for today's session is Andy Desco, one of our Southeast Region education specialists. This morning, if you joined us at 10 a.m. when we kicked off our week-long schedule, we presented a video tour of our Benner Springs State Fish Hatchery in Center County. And as we continue here this afternoon, we're going to keep the theme going on the hatchery theme as we welcome a special guest to talk all about Pennsylvania's state fish hatcheries. The streaming live with us this afternoon from Center County is Mr. Brian Wisner, the director of the Fish and Boat Commission's Bureau of Hatcheries. Good afternoon, Brian. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing well, Mike. How are you doing? And thanks for having me on the program too.
Thank you for helping out with this today. Brian, as you know, throughout the year, all of our Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission staff, including the great folks from the hatcheries, would be busy typically on hand at dozens of these outdoor expos and shows that would be happening in person in places, across the state from Harrisburg to Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, the Poconos, Erie, and beyond. But of course, because of COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of those events have been canceled this year or are still up in the air as far as attendance. So we're unable to be there. So it's our way of trying to make up some of that void right now by welcoming in our experts such as you to talk about various topics this week. And we thought that, well, hey, with trout season coming up, in T minus, it's 45 days or so around that time, people would really be interested in finding out what's going on at our state fish hatcheries when we deal with trout and all of the other species that we raise at the hatcheries. So, as we begin picking your brain about everything dealing with the state fish hatcheries this afternoon, Brian, let's get to know you. You provided me with, a short bio of yourself, but I think it would be better off in your words. You have about 35 years of fish rearing experience. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
Okay, Mike. Yeah, I'm one of those lucky people that gets to do what I love. Like you said, I've been doing it for about 35 years. And I started off with Fish Commission back in the mid 80s, working on American shad, rearing American shad down at Van Dyke Hatchery and working in the research unit there. After that, I went down to South Florida and I worked with marine geese and even catch a few sharks in some tanks. So it was a lot of fun working down there. It's not exactly my climate though. I'm more of a cool weather guy. So after working down there for a long time, I packed my bags and my family. We moved to Alaska, and I worked in salmon hatcheries in Alaska. I actually managed pink salmon and sockeye salmon, and that was part of an ocean ranching project. And that's where you take fingerlings and you release them out into the ocean, and they go out there and they grow and they feed and they get big, and They come back to the hatcheries where they were spawned and hatched as adults. And when they're coming back, they're available to recreational fishermen, commercial fishermen, subsistence users, and that's when we got our brood stock too. So that was a great project, and it taught me a lot about running big programs, size of fish and numbers. After that, I spent some time in South Carolina at South Carolina Department of Natural Resources, running their trout production program up in the mountains of South Carolina. And that's a state that's not really where you think of it as being a trout state, but they do have some mountains and they have some great trout fishing up in those mountains. Even used helicopters to stock fish back in some remote rivers and things like that. And then in 2007, I saw the opening here in Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission for a director of hatcheries. So I wanted to come back to my home roots where my family is and get back to some Pennsylvania fishing, and did the whole circle, came back home.
Well, we're glad to have you. I know that you're a key member of the team and you're a wealth of knowledge as far as everything that goes on at the hatcheries. And there are a lot of hatcheries. People might know that the hatchery that's somewhere within a short drive of their own backyard, but for other people, they may not be familiar with the size and the scope of the Fish and Boat Commission's hatchery system. So let's start off with that. Let's talk about the hatchery system and that basic question, Brian. How many fish hatcheries are there?
All right. Well, like you said, we do have a huge fish hatchery system. We got one of the biggest ones in the country, and we have 14 state fish hatcheries. And 8 of those are trout hatcheries. And then the remaining ones are either a warm cool species or a combination of warm cool along with trout. And we also do steelhead, American shad, and now we have a mussel program too. So we have a lot of variety out there. We're producing a lot of fish, and it's not just trout. It's all kinds of other species. There's over 20 species a year raised at our various hatcheries. And while we raise 3.2 million adult trout, we're raising 20, 30, 40 million warm cool water fish, but they're a lot smaller. They're fry and fingerlings going out to different lakes and waterways. So we have a variety of systems. We raise a lot of different species, and some of our systems are super high tech too. We've got everything from simple gravity flow hatcheries to high tech recirc, oxygenation, wastewater treatment plants. We've got a really big variety and a lot of work going on year round.
So you mentioned about 20 different species. So again, we've people are familiar with again that you mentioned North Carolina not being known as necessarily a trout state, but Pennsylvania certainly is. So when you think about the most visible form of hatchery interaction with the public, it's typically out on one of our spring or fall trout stockings. So then
Mhm.
tell us about, let's start with trout when we go down these species. What species of trout are we raising?
Well, we have brook trout, our native species, our state fish, and we have brown trout, rainbow trout, and we do a variety of rainbows called a golden rainbow trout. A lot of people are familiar with that. Sometimes they're called palominos, but really they're golden rainbow trout, which is just a different color phase of a rainbow. So those are the trout species that we're raising, Mike.
So then when it comes to the other types of fish, we have, let's talk about some of the bigger things. Walleye, I'll start with walleye. Walleye
Yeah,
is a very big program that we have, correct?
yeah, walleye is huge. We raise more walleye than any other species if you're just talking about the numbers. Our main hatcheries for walleye are in the northern part of the state. Linesville, up in Crawford County, is a huge one on the lake, on Pymatuning Lake. And then Pleasant Mountain up in Wayne County, and a couple other hatcheries do some of the work too. But while we're out there stocking trout in the rest of the state in March, April, and May, those guys are out collecting broodstock walleye and spawning them and raising them and stocking them as fry, or continuing to raise them and stocking them out as larger fingerlings. Like I said, typically we do 20 to 40 million walleye fry, 1 or 2 million fingerlings, and it's a huge effort to produce that many fish. Staff have to go out, well, in the early part of the season, walleye start spawning as soon as the ice is coming off the lakes. So those guys are up there with their boats and trap nets, pushing through the skim ice that's still left on the lakes and going out there and setting those nets in that cold environment. And as soon as the fish start to spawn, they're bringing them back in the hatchery and spawning those fish. One event that a lot of people would like to go at is the Linesville Open House, where they can actually see people spawning walleye and going through the process. And that's always a big hit with the local folks there in Linesville. And we have people coming from all over the state to come visit. Now with COVID-19, we didn't get to do that last year or this year, but hopefully, next year we'll be back at the open house and people can come up and see that too. Besides the walleye, the other big ones I'd say are obviously muskie, tiger muskie. A lot of great muskie fisheries in the Commonwealth here. Largemouth bass, channel catfish. We do a little fish trading with other states to get stripers, striped bass, and hybrid striped bass. We do lots of different panfish, do American shad, and the mussels again. So there's a lot of things going on.
When it comes to the sizes of the fish hatcheries, um, are there various sizes from smaller to larger? And does that have anything to do with the type of fish that are raised there? Do we have a certain type of design that we go with that works well, or is there a little bit of variance between each facility?
Yeah, if you're, most people when they think of a fish hatchery, they're thinking of the trout hatcheries. And the trout hatcheries typically have lots of raceways. We build them in places where there's a significant amount of water flow, good, high quality water, like here in Center County, where we have a lot of limestone springs. And that's where our hatcheries were built. Uh, Most of the time, we have a hatch house where we'll spawn the fish, incubate the eggs, raise up the fry and the fingerlings. That's kind of like the nursery area for the hatchery. And then they move out to the raceways. And those areas are usually fairly large, lots of infrastructure, pumps, recirculation, other things like that. We also oxygenate, so we have liquid oxygen and we oxygenate the water so it stays good and healthy for the fish. And as you move down that spectrum from the high intensity culture situations like the trout towards something more like the warm, cool, less intensive, almost extensive, where you're not doing a whole lot of input, we have ponds where we can take those ponds, we fertilize them, we'll get phytoplankton blooms, algae blooms, the right kind of algae for zooplankton, those small little bugs to eat. And then we can stock in fry, like walleye fry, into those ponds and those fry will eat the zooplankton and grow. And in about 30 to 40 days, we can harvest those ponds and have hundreds of thousands, up to millions, if we're looking at the whole pond system of all the hatcheries, walleye fingerlings. They'll go out and stock into our waters in the Commonwealth. So there's the whole spectrum of everything from very highly intensive, lots of infrastructure and pumps, all the way down to ponds which are fertilized. And we do have to control what's going on in the pond, but it's a far cry from what you do in an oxygenated raceway.
Yeah, and we got a good look at that. I want to compliment Doug Hess up at the Benner Spring Hatchery for a really nice tour this morning. If you didn't get a chance to check out our first session at 10 o'clock on Facebook this morning, that was just a really nice behind the scenes look. And I always like to liken a tour of a fish hatchery, which unfortunately we can't do right now, but it's kind of like going out when people get excited for deer season and they have a couple of trail cameras out and they see the deer walking by the trail camera a couple of weeks ahead of the season and they say, that's the one, that's the one I'm after. Going to a fish hatchery and checking out a raceway just packed with trout is kind of a really exciting way to get pumped up before the season. So
Yeah,
again, if you want to check that out, it's archived. Just go back and check out our Facebook feed from earlier this morning.
yeah, I couldn't agree with you more there, Mike. Even myself, when I go out to the hatcheries as we're loading up the trucks and getting ready for the first, couple of days of stocking season, and you're checking out those fish, I'm thinking, where am I going to go? Because
All
when you
right.
see
Well,
them, it's like seeing your trail cam pictures of the big buck. You're seeing the fish live, and people can check out our different videos that you folks are producing and see some of the fish going out. There's going to be some really nice fish this year. Some very nice fish.
we're going to get into the trout season a little bit more as we move along. Um, I want to take a quick look for those who've not been able to join us on a trout stocking over the years. We have a video. If producer Andy will cue that up. Keep in mind that this was taken a few years ago, I think in 2019. But this is along one of our Keystone Select streams along the McMichael Creek in central Pennsylvania. So, Andy, if you want to cue that up, we'll take a quick look at a trout stocking along the McMichael Creek section, Keystone Select section. Okay. As anticipated a little bit here, Brian, we're not hearing the video as much as seeing it. We
Sure.
can we can try to restart that if you'd like to, Andy. But as we're looking at this video, Brian, why don't you describe in a typical year um, what the trout stocking experience is like on literally hundreds of streams and lakes across Pennsylvania?
Well, in a typical year, a non-COVID year, our trout stocking schedule is posted on the web, so it's available to folks to see, and it is posted this year too. But in a typical year, we would have volunteers come out to the meeting locations where they would meet the WCO and the driver and get instructions and safety instructions also on how to do the stocking. And they would be able to assist while the fish culturist is unloading the truck and placing the fish in buckets. They can carry the buckets down to the creek, release the fish. In places like this Keystone Select that's in the video, you'll see that there's a lot of big fish. We stock extra numbers of trophy fish. There we go.
It looks like we finally caught up. So let's give you a break there and we'll take a look at this
This
video.
particular
Thank you.
area, the McMichael stream that we're doing today, it's a delayed harvest artificial lures only area, but it's selected as a Keystone Select waterway. So as a Keystone Select waterway, the average length of the trout are going to measure anywhere between 14 to 22 inches. And basically, you know, as you see all these volunteers that are out here today, if it wouldn't be for their help coming out here, it would be sometimes next to impossible to get the fish into other areas of the stream in the amount of time that we get them done. For the Eller sections of the McMichael Creek and the Eller streams that we stock here in Monroe County, the opening day is actually April 13th. If an angler is 16 years of age or older, they're required to possess a valid Pennsylvania fishing license. And of course, if they're going to be fishing in any stock trout waters, in addition to the Pennsylvania fishing license, they need to have a trout salmon permit. We also have what is known as a Mentor Youth Trout Fishing Day, and that date will be April the 6th at 8 a.m. That child is going to have a Mentor Youth license. In addition, the angler
Keep in
that
mind
puts
these
that
dates are not
child
valid
out for
for
Mentor Youth Day,
2021.
they have to have a valid license, and they're required to also have the trout salmon permit. And of course, the children are allowed to keep up to 2 trout. The adult angler
thanks,
is not
Andy.
allowed to harvest any trout, but any trout they may catch.
We're just going to go ahead and pause that because, as we mentioned, we wanted to give you a look at what it's like to be out there on the stream, which is one of the great experiences that we can offer as the Fish and Boat Commission to the public in a typical year. So I wanted to transition into a question that we got on Facebook earlier today that has to do with the upcoming trout season and how we're going to go about stocking some trout. So this year, we're going with a single statewide season, meaning that we're going to have a single mentored youth trout day on Saturday, March 27th. And then we're going to have the single statewide opening day of trout season 2 weeks later. So in order to get what would normally be the opening of in the southeast region for the entire state, now is going to be abiding by those dates. Brian, you guys as a hatchery staff have to start 2 weeks earlier. Can you explain how you're going to go ahead and do that? And so as we look into the week of February 15th, next week, how you'll be getting out there and moving trout all around the state?
Well, it takes a certain amount of time for us to stock the fish because we're traveling so much around the state. One thing a lot of folks don't realize just how many miles we put on the stocking trucks and the crews go out and drive. A typical year, we'll do 250 to 300,000 miles, in a couple of months in the spring, just driving around. I think, you can drive around the world a few times, those kind of miles. So we needed to start earlier so that we could get those stockings done everywhere before the opening day. the single opening day. So we are going to start March 15th. So the guys will be doing the same thing they would do.
February 15th.
I'm sorry, thank you. February 15th. They do everything the same as they would if they started March 1st. We're just moving it up a couple of weeks. We are going to have some more weather conditions to deal with. That's something that happens on and off every year. You know, roads that are still snowed or iced in, have to bust up some ice, cut some holes in some lakes to stock the fish. But one of the things I give the crews at the different fish hatcheries and the Fish and Boat Commission a lot of credit. They always get the job done, no matter what the circumstances. They find a way to get it done. We have to rearrange schedules sometimes to work with the weather and things like that. But we always get all those fish stocked before the opening day of season.
So it brings us to another question that we received, and really, why do we stock fish? Whether it's trout or walleye or muskie or panfish, why is there a need to stock trout? Why is it to is it out of necessity? Is it because we are enhancing, or is it a combination of both?
It's a common. You know, we've got tremendous fisheries in Pennsylvania. Wild trout fisheries, warm cool water fisheries, and stock trout fisheries. And one of the big parts about the stock trout fisheries is that we call the program a put and take program. We're putting the fish out there and we expect the anglers to catch them, whether it's for catch and release or to harvest them if it's our stock trout. So we're placing those fish in waters that cannot hold a population of trout that is high enough to create the type of fishery experience that we want for our anglers or our anglers expect. So we're stocking waters that typically don't hold trout at high levels year round, or there's something missing in that water that they can't hold good wild trout populations, high wild trout populations. So those are put and take types of fisheries. We also have a put, grow, and take, you could say, and that would include our fingerling trout program, where we're stocking fingerlings into waters where they don't have a lot of natural trout reproduction. It might be due to habitat or something in the water quality, but if you put a fingerling in there, it can grow and survive throughout the year because it has the right temperatures, the right food availability. So we have a put, grow, and take for those fisheries, but our warm and cool water fisheries are the same kind of thing. It's more of a put, grow, and potentially take or catch and release type fishery, where we stock our walleye and our muskie and some of our other species. They're good water bodies, good lakes or rivers that the fish can grow in and feed and mature, but something might be missing in those water bodies where the fish don't reproduce well on their own. So by going in there and stocking walleye fry and fingerlings or musky fingerlings or yearlings, we're able to help create those opportunities for anglers to fish for more species and more locations around the Commonwealth. So that's the great thing. There's so many fisheries around PA. We've got something for everybody, really, whether it's trout and warm, cool, and muskie, walleye, steelhead. There's so many different things out there available. Also, part of our program is to restore populations. A lot of people who live near big lakes and have dams know that over the last several years, we've been working on dam restorations and draining a few lakes and rebuilding the dams and filling them back up. But when you fill that lake back up, we go in there and we work on stocking it with fish species again. So we'll stock it with forage species and predator species and do that for a couple few years until the population builds back up where there's a nice sustainable fishery for the anglers again. Also, a species I've mentioned a couple of times, American shad. We work on American shad restoration for the Susquehanna River, stocking shad fry into the river so that when they migrate out, shad go out to the ocean and mature. And then when they come back to Conowingo Dam, there's adult shad there that hopefully some can be passed upriver and some will be spawned at the hatchery and other things will be done to help restore the populations. Mussels is the new one that I've mentioned a couple of times too, where we're working on mussel restoration. There are places around Pennsylvania where the mussel populations are very low, other places where it's high. And we're working at the Union City State Fish Hatchery to culture mussels and to place them in some of those environments where they need a boost.
Before we go on, Brian, real quick, as
Yeah.
you talk about, since you're on the topic of mussels, we have a couple of photos there so that people can see what we're talking about. So what we have, as Andy's bringing up some of this media for us, is over the summer there was an introduction of mussels into the Dunkard Creek out in Greene County. And those were a combination of mussels that were, uh, I believe we received some of the mussels that were had already been grown. For instance, they were in they had a shell basically, and then we took them to our hatchery. Um, if you can describe what's going on, and in this photo here, this was actually uh, what you see there is a larger mussel that was fitted with a transponder inside there so that they can actually track the population of them. So this larger mussel was one that existed in the creek before, but since the population is low, we're coming in and now adding more of them that we're raising as a commission, correct?
Major mortality episode down in Dunker Creek. And while some of the fish populations have started coming back, mussel populations don't rebound like fish. They don't move around like fish. So it's taking a lot more work and effort. And that's part of what we're working on is the restoration or placing new mussels back into Dunkard Creek to help reestablish the population. And
So
one thing I'll mention about the mussels too is that, as an agency, we have our fishing license dollars to fund a lot of programs. But for the mussel programs, there's different sources of funding rather than fishing license. It's different conservation funding mechanisms are being used for the mussel program, which is great.
I believe there's another photo that we have of some of the smaller mussels that were actually raised there. These are plain pocketbook mussels. So that's actually the size that we're dealing with that we're raising at the hatchery, and then bringing them down in that smaller size by the hundreds, really, and then going out as a crew and placing them. Do you any experience? I got to go out on this trip. There was they refer to that as planting mussels. You walk through the creek and find a good spot for them. Any experience doing that yourself, Brian?
No, I hope to join the crew one of these days and get up there and help them with some of those tasks. The guys at Union City, the staff at Union City have done a tremendous job of setting up a new mussel culture facility within that hatchery and retrofitting part of it for that. And they're doing some really exciting work. And mussels are new for us in the Bureau of Hatcheries and Fish and Boat Commission to raise. They have a whole completely different life cycle, and actually how it works is when the mussel releases its uh, I'll call them larvae because nobody would care about the special terms they have. Mussels have all kinds of weird terms. But when they release the larvae, they're taken up into a fish's gills, and that's where they incubate. So the fish acts as a host for these mussel larvae. And then after they get to a certain size, they fall off and then get into the environment. So not only do you have to spawn the mussels and raise the larvae and put them onto a fish host, each species of mussels has a specific type of host species. So one might work on largemouth bass, another one might be a perch, another species might work on some kind of darter, another one might work on American eel. So you have to be able to match the mussels to the host. And there's a very long process of going through all this. And the staff at Union City have done a tremendous job. And I think we'll be showing the public a lot more work from up there in the near future.
All right. We are talking with Brian Wisner. He's the director of our Bureau of Hatcheries for the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission. And we're talking about everything related to Pennsylvania state fish hatcheries. We've been going now for about 25 minutes, and we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we actually have another video that we're going to try to show you as we talked about the Fish and Boat Commission's walleye program. It's a short one, but I think it'll kick off our next conversation as people are asking to hear more about those type of stocking programs and things that we have going on at our hatcheries involving walleye and other species besides trout. So when we come back, we'll be gone for just a minute here. Take a breath, get a drink, and we'll see you in a minute here as we continue the 2021 Virtual Outdoor Expo here on Facebook. All right, we're taking a quick break here. We are going to bring it back, and thank you for rolling with us here as we continue to explore all of the ways that we can bring you virtual content like this through our Facebook channel, through the Virtual Outdoor Expo. If there are a couple technical glitches along the way, we thank you for your understanding as we're trying to do our best to make our staff available to you to answer any questions and tell you more about our Fish and Boat Commission programs here throughout the week. As a reminder, we have a complete schedule of events, different sessions set up throughout the end of the week here at 10 a.m. and 1 p.m. daily. And you can find the full schedule of events right here on Facebook if you check out the feed. So we're back here with Brian Wisner, the director of the Fish and Boat Commission's Bureau of Hatcheries. And I'm going to ask producer Andy to go ahead and cue up our Raising Walleye video, which is a short video. And while he's doing that, before we get things started, Brian, we have a question here from Matt on Facebook. And this is maybe something that is a fisheries management question, but maybe a hatchery guy would have a little bit of understanding. So we're going to give it a try, okay? Because I know that there is a big difference between raising fish and one of the biologists who manages the fish. But it's a good question. It caught me because I've certainly run into this situation while fishing, across the state. He says, "What happens when the stream you fish gets overpopulated with fall fish and creek chubs? Does this stop the reproduction of panfish, bass, and trout?" And I guess what that means is what he's getting at is when other species that maybe aren't as desirable, do we ever come in there and try to repopulate in as part of a restocking plan for a creek or a lake?
Well, that is more of an area fisheries manager type question, but I can say that our biologists go out and do different surveys in creeks and lakes periodically around the Commonwealth. So they try to stay in touch with what's going on in different water bodies, and then they make their management decisions based on the type of results they get from those surveys. And if it involves a stocking, then they make a request to us at the hatcheries to produce fish and place them into those waters. But I say I defer that to the fisheries management type people, the staff there, those biologists. But they're the ones that have their finger on the pulse of what's going on with the fisheries and the specifics of different life cycles and what's going on.
And by the way, I'll just say this: there's nothing wrong with catching some fall fish or some suckers. They can fight pretty good, and if catching a fish is better than catching no fish, I always say. So
I like the fall fish. I mean, they can be a good fighter. Sometimes I'm fishing for bass or trout, you can catch them. So
excellent. All right, Andy, do we have that video queued up here about raising walleye? If so, we're going to take a quick peek at that, and we'll listen in and be back in about a minute and a half. All right, so not hearing the volume on that one, Brian, this is an inside look at our hatcheries. I think Andy's going to try to bring that one back up for us again. We'll remind people that we have a tremendous amount of video resources for those who are interested in seeing these type of things on our Facebook page, or excuse me, our YouTube channel.
The Fish and Boat Commission supplements walleye populations through stocking. There's a good chance that the last walleye you caught was stocked by the Commission. The process of raising walleye starts in the spring, when the water temperature hits 42 degrees. Using trap nets, hatchery staff collects spawn and walleye. These fish are called broodstock. At the hatchery, the fish are sorted by sex and how ready they are to spawn. Broodstock are placed in an anesthetic prior to spawning in order to prevent injury. Eggs are extracted from the females, and sperm is extracted from the males. The eggs are then fertilized by gently mixing the two in a pan of water. Approximately 8 quarts of fertilized walleye eggs are stirred with a turkey feather to keep the eggs from sticking together. Fertilized eggs are put into incubator jars. Each jar holds approximately 400,000 walleye eggs. Water is circulated through the jars throughout their development. After 14 days, the eggs hatch and the fry swim up. Some of the walleye fry are then stocked into Pennsylvania lakes and rivers. The others are stocked into several hatchery ponds where they will grow until fingerling size. Fingerlings are then stocked into Pennsylvania's lakes and rivers where they will reach legal size in 3 to 4 years. The next time you catch a walleye, remember what it takes to produce one.
Well said. A lot of work goes into that process.
Yeah, it does, Mike. The people at our hatcheries are really busy during all seasons of the year. It's a 24-hour, 7-day a week, 365-day a year job.
That is one of the things about the hatchery employees. They are there on Christmas. They're there on Easter, New Year's Day, you name it. It's something you can't. The fish need to be fed every day.
Yeah, if you kind of funny, ask him what he does the rest of the year when he's not stocking.
Yeah. No, I've spent some time at the hatcheries, and again, we look forward to the day when we can welcome everybody back for in-person tours. Right now, the best we can do is offer some of the virtual opportunities, like we did this morning, um, here as part of our expo. But what a great opportunity is to get out there and walk around. And some of our facilities uh, are located in beautiful areas of the state to visit as well. So all the way up to in the if you're making your first trip up to Erie County for some reason, there's a couple of hatcheries up there. There's the Fairview Hatchery. Um, why don't you tell people where they can visit when the time is right?
Yeah, we've hardly touched on Fairview actually, and with the steelhead program up there, and I just wanted to mention that that's a fishery that's really relies on hatchery production. It's the steelhead in Lake Erie. There really is virtually no natural production or minuscule, if there is some, in those warm freestone streams that we have as tributaries. So we're stocking about 1,000,000 7 to 8 inch, we call them smolts, into the Lake Erie tributaries every winter. Actually, this time of the year, February, March, early April, and they go out into Erie waters and grow, and then come back in the fall, winter, and spring, which is what people have been catching right now this year. We're just finishing up our spawning season now at Fairview Hatchery. They usually do spawns from November to February, do about 10 spawns. And they go out into places like Trout Run's our major place for our brood stock. And I know you'll be covering this later on another virtual meeting with our steelhead folks. And they do get helpers up there in the non-COVID times to come up and help catch some of the steelhead broodstock, different school groups and things like that. If you wanted to go visit hatcheries, several of them have visitor centers and have viewing. You mentioned Linesville has a great visitor center. It's large, has a lot of displays for people to look at. I don't want to leave anybody out, but some of the other major ones, Huntsdale has a nice viewing center with a tank of live fish that people can see. Reynoldsdale has a great viewing center in their visitor room. Tionesta, Pleasant Mount, and some of the other hatcheries have smaller visitor centers too. But the important thing is, if we were in more normal circumstances, we encourage people to come out and visit the hatcheries. I mean, if you got folks visiting from out of town looking for something to do, just pile in the car and go down, visit the hatchery, look at the fish. Staff will tell you a little bit, look at some signage, check out the visitor centers. And it's a good time, and the kids will love it. I guarantee it.
Definitely will. I can attest to that. All right. Well, we're going to wrap things up here shortly. We have a few more topics that we want to get into, and I think it's fair that we've solicited some questions, and some of them are along the same, um, you know, people asking about a lot about trout stuff, which we've covered, some walleye questions, which we've covered. But here's one. Let's talk about some common questions and misconceptions, Brian. First of all, here's one. So, the misconception that the Fish and Boat Commission has closed several hatcheries. What do you say to that?
No, we have not closed several hatcheries. Um, I started here in 2000, not closed a single hatchery since. I think the only one that was ever really closed was Big Spring back in 2001. The agency went through some budget issues, and some of the proposals involved mothballing some hatcheries, but that never occurred. We still have the same number of hatcheries. We still produce the same number of fish. So, although that rumor is out there, it's a false narrative.
Okay, so which brings us to the second question here regarding the number of fish that we stock. So, are we now stocking fewer fish than we did before, or is that a misconception as well?
That's basically a misconception too, Mike. We're stocking the same number and size fish that we have since 2007. Before that, we did stock some more, but in 2007, we made the shift to less fish but bigger fish. So each of our hatcheries is really defined by how many fish they can raise as far as biomass. How many pounds of fish can that hatchery hold? So by raising larger fish, we had to cut the number a little bit. And the goal for us at that point in time in 2007 was to stock approximately 3.2 million adult trout. And they were going to be about 11 inches long and about a half pound. That's the same number and the same size, 13, 14 years now. It hasn't changed at all. You do see some variety in sizes. Sometimes the fish are a little smaller, sometimes they're a little bigger. But every year our average has been right around that 11 inches. So it's the same size fish, same number of fish.
Here's a question from someone who wants to.
I'm gonna retract that. We're stocking more bigger fish now. The last couple of years, we've been increasing the size of our trophy fish. When at the hatchery, we call a trophy fish 14 to 20 inches, typically 3.5 years old. And typically we would stock several years ago about 30,000 trophy fish. Last year we bumped it up to around 50,000. This year we're going to be doing about 70,000. 70,000, twice as many as we did a few years ago. So I think the anglers out there that are paying attention when the fish are being stocked and when they're catching fish and looking at or what they're keeping, they're going to be seeing a lot more big fish.
Here's a question. Steve wants to know basically if the Fish and Boat Commission sells fish to private groups. Now, maybe you want to answer that in two ways. You can answer the question about whether we'll sell someone fish, but you maybe I'll expand that and say how we work with other organizations to provide them fish, if you would answer those questions in order.
Right. That's a good way to answer it because we didn't really touch on that second part yet, and I wanted to. We do not sell fish to people. No, we do not. Now, there are commercial trout hatcheries in the state that sell fish to people that want to buy them or stock them, and that's part of their business and what they do. We don't sell fish to anybody. What we do is we have a program called our Cooperative Nursery Program, where we supply fish to our partners in our cooperative nursery program. We supply them with small fingerlings, and then they are usually sportsmen's groups, schools, other conservation-minded groups, where we provide them with the fingerlings, trout fingerlings for the most part, and then they use their infrastructure, their water source, their raceways, their labor, their electricity. They buy the fish food, and they continue to raise those fish from that fingerling size to the stockable size. And then they release them into public waters so they're available to the anglers of Pennsylvania. So it's a partnership between Fish and Boat Commission and these cooperative nurseries, where we're supplying them with the fish, and then they're taking it from there all the way up to stocking them. We do supply them with technical guidance and expertise to help them out along the way if they need it. And we have grant programs to help them out if they need to purchase certain pieces of equipment. But for the most part, they're taking on the lion's share of the work once they get the fish. There's about 160 cooperative nurseries located around the state, and they are supplied with about 1 million trout from us, and then they stock out almost that number come stocking season. So we're stocking 3.2 million. The cooperative nurseries are stocking 1 million. So they're doing a big chunk of the fish that are out there for the anglers. And there are some groups that take muskies and panfish and other species. So it's more than trout, but trout makes up the bulk of that. It's a good question, Mike.
Another question or two here before we let you go, Brian. Thank you for spending so much time with us. Um, Here's a good question. It basically deals with some discussion that's occurring regarding fish consumption. People want to know, is it safe to eat the fish that we raise at our hatcheries?
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, the state has fish consumption advisories out there for different bodies of water, and they have a blanket one out that our hatchery fish fall under because it's for all fish in the state. But in actuality, we have our fish tested at our state fish hatcheries, and each year they go to a lab where they check them out for PCBs is what they check them out for, and usually we're non-detect or an extremely, extremely low level on that whole thing, barely detect, I'll call it. So our fish are very safe to eat, but as always, we ask people to follow the fish consumption advisories.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, and thank you for our producer Andy Desco for keeping, and as well as I want to thank Adam Spangler, another one of our regional education specialists, who's been feeding us questions here today as they're coming in through Facebook. So, hey, I think you sort of addressed it earlier when you talk about a group of staff that works 365 days a week, including all the holidays and weekends. It goes without saying that some of our fish hatchery staff are among the most dedicated professionals that we have within our agency. But I did want to give you an opportunity as the boss to recognize them one more time, Brian. And if you wanted to say anything to the men and women who make our hatchery system work, if you wanted to end by saying something to all of them and recognizing their hard work, the floor is yours.
Oh, thanks, Mike. Yeah, I think Pennsylvania has the best group of anybody I've ever seen around the country. I've worked in different places, and we got the most dedicated, best fish culturists and clerk typists and maintenance and foremen and hatchery managers and everybody else in the Fish Commission, really, more than just hatcheries. I deal with the hatchery folks, so I know them the best. And they are extremely dedicated in what they do. Most of, I'd say 99% of us are passionate about hunting and fishing and outdoors and conservation. So if they're not at the hatcheries raising fish, they're probably out catching fish too. So if anybody's interested in this type of career and you love fisheries and you want to work there day in, day out and have that level full of dedication to it, I highly recommend looking at the Fish and Boat Commission for a career choice because we're the lucky ones. We're fortunate, we're blessed to be able to have a career that we can be passionate about and be able to supply the product that we do, the opportunities for the anglers of the Commonwealth.
Okay, Brian Wisner, Director of the Fish and Boat Commission's Bureau of Hatcheries. Thank you so much for joining us here for this session, which is all about the state fish hatcheries. A reminder, if you want to learn more about Pennsylvania state fish hatcheries, just go to our website, that is fishandboat.com. Also, a reminder that while we talked a lot about assisting, showed a video of volunteers helping out with trout stocking, we announced several weeks ago that unfortunately we're not able to accept those walk-up volunteers yet. We can only look forward to next season and future seasons that we can get everybody back in the mix. But right now, one of the questions that we've been getting, and I'll just address this one, is if you're part of a group that is established, that has already been helping us with trout stocking in the spring, your local regional law enforcement office, your WCO, will be in contact with you. So you'll know if you haven't been contacted regarding helping out with trout stocking, that's the way that it'll happen this year. We are going to be working with some select volunteers, but please don't show up and follow the trucks around. We're unfortunately not going to be able to use that assistance this year due to the COVID-19 protocol. You mentioned jobs with the Fish and Boat Commission. I want to remind people that coming up on Thursday, as part of our virtual outdoor expo, we're going to have a session all about employment with the Fish and Boat Commission. So that's going to happen on Thursday at 10 a.m. We'll be speaking with our Director of Human Resources, Maxine Johnson. She'll tell you where you can go to check out open job postings with the entire Commonwealth, and specifically the Fish and Boat Commission. A couple of other hatchery-related sessions that we'll be having tomorrow at this time at 1 o'clock. Brian touched on Pennsylvania's Steelhead program. We're going to have a more in-depth discussion with some of our folks from the Fairview Hatchery, as well as the Ty and Esta crew up there, biologists, will be joining us to talk about steelhead. And then we're going to round out the week on Friday morning at 10 a.m. We will be having a session called Let's Talk Muskies, where we're going to talk to the staff from the Linesville State Fish Hatchery, as well as the fisheries biologists up there in the lake. The guys that maybe I could have been wrong there. Sometimes I swap out the steelhead and the muskie biologists. We'll be talking with staff from the Linesville Hatchery about raising muskies, as well as the fisheries biologists who specialize in that species. So a lot to look forward to here yet as we approach 2 o'clock. We're trying to make these sessions, as informative as possible, but contain them to about 40 minutes to an hour or so at the most. So at this point, as I look at the clock, we're approaching 2 o'clock, and I want to just thank you, Brian, once again. If you have any questions, folks, that are outstanding that we didn't address that are relevant to our topic on Facebook, we're going to do our best over the next couple of days to get you an answer. And in the meantime, we hope that you'll join us for the rest of our sessions here as part of our 2021 Virtual Outdoor Expo.
All right, thanks, Mike.
Hey, thank you, Brian. And just a reminder that our next session will occur tomorrow morning starting at 10 o'clock. It'll be in the morning. It'll be a conversation with a waterways conservation officer, as we will speak with Colonel Corey Britchard, the director of our bureaus, of the Fish and Boat Commission's Bureau of Law Enforcement, as well as Waterways Conservation Officer Rachel Turner Diaz. So both of them a wealth of knowledge, and we look forward to your questions. So thanks for tuning in this afternoon. Thank you to our producer, Andy Desco, and all of you who watched. And we'll see you tomorrow as part of the Fish and Boat Commission's 2021 Virtual Outdoor Expo.